A very warm welcome everyone to our next podcast. My name is Barry Sadler and welcome to the Maritime Education Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about something that seems to constantly hit the news at the moment, and that is, what exactly is the dark or shadow fleet? I think most of us that have spent a long time at sea are very used to sailing on ships that have a flag state. Obviously, flag states differ in the way that they inspect ships, in the way that they impose legislation, and they differ in the actual legislation that they create. But nonetheless, in order to sail freely around the world and exercise the right of innocent passage, every ship needs to be registered with a flag state. Innocent passage is the term given to the right of a vessel to sail through the territorial waters of a sovereign state and not be challenged in sailing through those waters. Now, we're not talking about the ability just to sail into a harbour. That's obviously controlled by local legislation. We're talking about the ability to safely and peacefully transit the waters of a sovereign state. Innocent passage is a right afforded to all vessels as long as they are not there to harm anybody, to create environmental problems, or indeed to wage war. If a ship has no intention of doing that, then that ship has the right of innocent passage. But to gain that right of innocent passage, it must be flying the flag of a state. So it must have, if you like, colours attached to its mast. The dark fleet mentioned so often in the media these days mainly consists of vessels which do not have a registered flag state or use fraudulent or flag hopping techniques to obscure their identity. Those of you at sea and in the know are probably saying, well, what about the continuous synopsis record, this half certificate, half passport that testifies to the history of the ship? And yes, flags that do hop around will probably have falsified continuous synopsis records. They will have lots of falsified documents on board, which may show them hopping from one flag to the other, or may show them registered to a flag when actually that flag state has no record of either their registration or any record indeed of who the owner of the ship is. Some consider the oceans of the world to be unregulated when it comes to the network of vessels that operates beyond the reach of international law. But to operate beyond the reach of international law, you must be beyond the reach of any national legislation. That's how international standards are put onto ships. They are implemented through the national legislation of the flag state of the ship, the flag who's being flown, the colours, if you like, of the ship. But at the end of the day, no ship is beyond the law, and therefore, as well as affording the right of innocent passage, a ship needs to be seen to be registered in order to, if you like, confirm and reassure states that they are sailing through that they are indeed regulated to some degree. The dark fleet sometimes operate without a flag. They sometimes use flags of convenience. They sometimes frequently change their flag to avoid detection, and of course they will nearly always falsify registration documents to appear legitimate. Why do they do this? Why do we have a dark fleet in the first place? One would hope that it's unnecessary, but of course crimes that the dark fleet can be involved in are quite a few. Sanction evasion seems to be the one that's hitting the media at the moment, in that, as we know, various ships from various countries do have sanctions against them, and not just sanctions against the nationality of the ship, but sanctions against the cargo that they are carrying. If you're a member of the Dark Fleet, you may be able to evade these sanctions by not being detected as carrying the illegitimate cargo, or indeed have any flag state monitoring what you're doing. This would normally result in the ships turning off their AIS, their automatic identification systems, to avoid detection. This is a fundamental principle of the Dark Fleet, in that the AIS itself either needs to be off or it needs to be changed every time the ship's flag or name changes to avoid detection. So AIS plays a very, very important part in the Dark Fleet, and the AIS systems are of course illegally tampered with and operated outside of the requirements of the SOLAS Convention. Illegal fishing is also something that the Dark Fleet engages in. So this is fishing within the territorial limits of another flag state or another sovereign state and not declaring their own flag state, or going in, if you like, under the radar by switching off their AIS. Illegal fishing can lead to illegal environmental crimes where things are disposed of over the side of the ship, and illegal fishing often produces a lot of environmental garbage which it is not legal under MARPOL to dispose of, such as fishing gear, nets over the side of the ship. And unfortunately, illegal fishing often results in environmental crimes as well. Human trafficking and forced labour are often undertaken by the Dark Fleet. Forced labour is possible because, having flagged the vessel or not flagged the vessel with a dodgy flag state, there is no oversight under the Maritime Labour Convention as to how the seafarers are employed on board the ship. This can lead to the seafarers working long hours, long contracts, with often no guarantee of when or if they will be returned home. Repatriation is the right of any seafarer, and the Dark Fleet will often keep seafarers on board way beyond any supposed contractual date, or refuse to pay for their repatriation when they do release them. Human trafficking can also be undertaken on a large scale by those in the Dark Fleet, and many of the vessels that we see illegally bringing immigrants into other countries have no flag state at all. One of the more common and perhaps better known crimes that the Dark Fleet are involved in is of course drugs and weapons trafficking. A lot of drug boats do not have a flag state. They are simply a very small boat that is unregistered anywhere and therefore very, very difficult to track. Not just track the country or flag that they come from, but track the owner. One of the principles in holding a proper registry of shipping by a flag state is to identify the owner of the ship, so that if the ship is involved in something that it shouldn't be, the owner can be traced and questioned. Avoiding detection is important, of course, for the Dark Fleet, and as I've already said, this is done in certain ways, the main way, of course, being the manipulation of the automatic identification system by either turning it off, spoofing it, or falsifying the contents within the signal that's sent out by the AIS. AIS spoofing is becoming a lot more common, where ships falsify their locations to mislead authorities. But as AIS is used for keeping a lookout, this can cause dangerous situations around the world if spurious targets are detected by vessels operating legitimate AIS systems. It goes without saying that there's false documentation involved, and that companies are set up which don't actually exist that are claimed to hold the ships. The other way they stay under the radar is, of course, by having their operations happen remotely, away from the coast, away from prying eyes, and in coves and inlets where it's very, very difficult, particularly for satellites, to look into. Now, the international response to the Dark Fleet is there, and recently the IMO set out plans to try and reduce the Dark Fleet by putting extra pressure on flag states to regulate the ships that they have on their register. This means that they will frequently audit who has registered the ships with the flag state and who their owners are, to ensure that they don't find any ships that are not actually legitimately registered. The possession of falsified documents can normally only be detected when the ship tries to put into port of a legitimate flag state country, and that flag state country challenges the certification and registration of that ship. If that ship stays in international waters, it is very, very difficult to sanction that ship or bring regulatory crackdowns upon it if it doesn't enter somebody's jurisdiction to allow that flag state to enforce the legislation upon it. Enhanced tracking through satellite imagery and AI-powered tracking systems with machine learning algorithms are also used to detect AIS anomalies. So a ship that is acting suspicious or that's position can potentially be wrong is picked up quicker. Port state control inspections look very, very hard at the continuous synopsis record to ensure that at no point has it been tampered with, by checking with the individual flag states listed on the continuous synopsis record to ensure that they have indeed issued a flag to that ship. If the continuous synopsis record shows just one falsification, that's normally indicative that all the entries should be treated with caution, and therefore the port state control officer will normally bring this to the attention of the local security units. In conclusion, the dark fleet represents one of the most presaging challenges to global maritime security at the moment, and with the flag state oversight being as weak as it is in some countries, it's important that the IMO and other proactive flag states put pressure on those individual flags who open themselves up to the dark fleet by not ensuring that their ships are audited, that their records are kept, and that ships that claim to be registered with them are actually registered with them. Within the UK has its own government department, Registrar of Shipping and Seamen. And that government department does exactly that. It keeps an eye on who registers their ship in the UK, it keeps an eye on who the owner of that ship is, and it keeps a very tight rein on the continuous synopsis record, so that any changes that are brought to its attention are verified by the Registrar of Shipping and Seamen to ensure that they are accurate before the continuous synopsis record is updated. This kind of proactive stance is necessary, and the IMO are currently putting pressure on flag states that do not take this detailed and thorough approach to look again at their national legislation to ensure that the flag cannot be abused. The colours that are flown by a ship are really important. The colours that are flown by a ship indicate to the rest of the world that that ship is trading legitimately. Unless control is brought by those flag states whose flags are routinely used for these dark fleet purposes, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the world to manage this. The IMO is auditing flag states. Under the III code, the implementation of International Instruments Code, it allows the IMO to go into the records of an individual flag state and check to make sure that both the laws, procedures and registration documents of that flag state are in order. If the IMO does find that there's problems, they will warn the flag state and internationally can obtain sanctions against that flag state and sanctions against the use of its flag. So in other words, a dark fleet that's using that flag state may find it difficult, one, to transit the waters of a sovereign state, and two, to actually berth in a port. So that's the dark fleet, guys. And thank you all very, very much for listening. I look forward to speaking to you again in our next podcast. And in the meantime, sail safe, everybody. Thank you very much.